Welcome to Disciple Dojo. We're continuing in this new year our walk through the lyrics of the Psalms. If you've missed the previous videos in this series, they're all here on the channel in a playlist. I'll link it, as always, in the video description below. And if you appreciate our teaching videos like this, we would appreciate you subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. That helps us be able to do all of this and to continue to grow this ministry here on YouTube. So as always, I'm going to read Psalm 21 this time, and I'm going to be reading it from my study Bible that I normally read from. But we're going to read it first, and then, as always, we're going to look at the Hebrew text itself and see how some different translations have handled some of the passages. Here we go. Psalm 21. For the director of music, a psalm of David. O Lord, the king rejoices in your strength. How great is his joy in the victories you give. You have granted him the desire of his heart and have not withheld the request of his lips. Selah. You welcomed him with rich blessings and placed a crown of pure gold on his head. He asked you for life and you gave it to him, length of days forever and ever. Through the victories you gave, his glory is great. You have bestowed on him splendor and majesty. Surely you have granted him eternal blessings and made him glad with the joy of your presence. For the king trusts in the Lord. Through the unfailing love of the Most High, he will not be shaken. Your hand will lay hold on all your enemies. Your right hand will seize your foes. At the time of your appearing, you will make them like a fiery furnace. In his wrath, the Lord will swallow them up, and his fire will consume them. You will destroy their descendants from the earth, their posterity from mankind. Though they plot evil against you and devise wicked schemes, they cannot succeed. For you will make them turn their backs when you aim at them with drawn bow. Be exalted, O Lord, in your strength. We will sing and praise your might. All right, let's take a look at this psalm. It's not too long. It's only 13 verses in English. Let's look a little closer at the Hebrew text itself and see what we see. Now, if you saw the previous episode in this series, Psalm 20 is seen by most of the interpreters out there, at least, as the first part, and then Psalm 21 is seen as the second part. So these form kind of a diptych. And Psalm 20 is the request that the king would make, or a liturgy that would be prayed before going into battle. And then Psalm 21 is kind of the answer to that. It's recounting how God hears that prayer and he does save his anointed one. And so both Psalm 20 and Psalm 21 begin. We know they're separate because they both have headings, and the headings for both of them are the same. L'Natseach, Mizmor LeDavid. And again, I'm not going to go into Natseach because we've talked about this numerous times at this point. So if you're wondering, if you ever hear me in a video in one of these Psalms, just gloss over a Hebrew term without really unpacking it, and you're like, what does that mean? It's probably because we've addressed it in previous episodes. So that's all the more reason to watch each of these episodes. But we've talked about the Natseach and also Mizmor LeDavid, what that means. A song for David, to David, by David, of David. So verse 2, verse 1 in English. Adonai, this is the name of God. Yahweh, Adonai, Ba'azcha, in your strength. Az is the word for strength or might. Yishmach Melech, he rejoices, a king, or he will rejoice. This is an imperfect, and so sometimes that can be like a future tense. It's from my understanding of Hebrew, imperfects are action that is incomplete in the mind of the speaker. Perfects are actions that are complete in the mind of the speaker. Now, that doesn't mean past or present. It just, most of the time, imperfects are either present or future in English, and perfects, most of the time, are what we would call past, because it's a completed action. It's already taken place. But that's not exactly true, and Hebrew grammarians point that out, and especially in poetry. The verb tenses are just much more fluid in Hebrew poetry than they are in English. So this is why you will get variations so often when it comes to poetic sections of the Hebrew Bible in English translations. Some translations, you'll read it and you're like, wait a minute, this is a past tense in this translation, but this translation has it in a future tense, or this translation has it in a present tense. So that is just something that you learn, and it's why you need to always, if you don't know Hebrew and you aren't able to read Hebrew, you need to be comparing translations, because you'll pick up on that if you do. So I'm just treating these as imperfects, just like present tense. That's why I said, Yahweh, in your strength, a king rejoices. Now, some translations say the king, but the king would be Hamelech. There's no definite article on the front of this. And so the reason I'm saying taking it as a king is because, one, it doesn't have the definite article, and there's no king who's already been mentioned, other than if you take the title line, this Le David. Possibly if it's talking about David, then he would be the king. And the king, I don't think it's a wrong translation, but I think that it's better to take it as a king because this is not just limited to David. This psalm is for whoever the king of Israel is. So any king of Israel should rejoice in Yahweh's strength because that's the source of his strength, of his power to begin with. So it's minor. It's not any like exegetical hill to die on, but it's just an example. I think you would expect Hamelech if this were the king, but it's just as Melech. So that's why I'm taking it as indefinite. So Yahweh, in your strength, the king rejoices. Uvishuathecha, it's a fun word, uvishuathecha. By now, those of you that are kind of savvy with Hebrew, you should probably recognize this root whenever you see it. This is Yeshua, salvation. It's from Yasha. It's literally Yeshua, in your salvation, but they stick in on the front, the B. Anyway, don't worry about this if you don't know Hebrew. But this is where the name Jesus comes from. It's also where the name Joshua in the Old Testament came from, which means he saves or salvation. So in your salvation or in your deliverance or in your saving, ma yagel ma'od. How, ma is like how or how much, how he exalts exceedingly. Me'od is the Hebrew word for very or exceedingly or much. So how he exalts exceedingly. Now there's a Kathiv Kare issue here. Kathiv, what is written is this Yagel, and this Yod here it's a strange form. So the Masoretic scribes have put a Kare reading. This is what you're supposed to say. This is how you're supposed to pronounce it. That's what Kare means. What is written versus what is to be read. And it's to be read as Yagel rather than Yagel, Yagel. So this is just a weird form, and that's the scribe saying, hey, we know it says this, and we're not going to change the letters because each letter is sacred and holy. And if it was a mistake, it happened before the Masoretes got their hands on it. So what they're saying is this is probably an error in translation, or either a form that's irregular, not used, and shouldn't be used when you read it out loud. So if you're reading it, say it this way. So that's what these brackets are if you see in a Hebrew Bible sometime. And this is how this psalm begins. The structure, I've put a break here, and this is following John Goldengay in his commentary on the Psalms, is you have an A, B, B, A pattern. You have a little chiasm here, which we've talked about here on the channel numerous times. But the first opening verse, in English at least, 2 verses in Hebrew, is going to be bookended by the last verse. So, Adonai, Yahweh, in your strength the king rejoices, and in your salvation how he exalts exceedingly. So, verse 3 in Hebrew, verse 2 in English. Ta'avath livo nathata lo. You can kind of hear some of the poetry in this. Ta'avath livo nathata lo. That, it kind of rhymes, I guess, but it's kind of, anyway, it flows in Hebrew better than English. But in English, it's craving, literally craving of his heart. So the craving of his heart, what his heart desires, you gave to him. And then the next line, Va'aresheth shefathau ba'al manakta selah. The craving of his heart, you gave him. And I'm just leaving this transliterated in my translations, Eresheth. And Eresheth, of his lips, not you withheld, Selah. Now, why did I leave this transliterated? Because this word only appears here in the Hebrew Bible. It's related, I think it's believed to be related to the same root as morash, which is translated as like possessions or desire or longing or something like that in other passages. But even that's not a very common word. So this is what's called a hapex legomenon. This only appears this one time here in the Hebrew Bible. And so most translations translate it as request, something like that. LEB, the request of his lips. NIV, request of his lips. Lexham English has the petition of his lips. Eugene Peterson didn't even translate it in the Message. He just kind of condensed it all into, you gave him exactly what he wanted. You didn't hold back. But most of the translations, at least English, Jewish or Christian, have it as translated as request. And that's mostly contextual. You know, you crave something in your heart. Well, what do you do with your lips? You ask for it. You request it. You petition it. So verse 4, 3 in English. Ki tekadmenu, literally, for you meet him. Now, this one is in the imperfect. That's what this t on the front is. This is an imperfect, so that's why I'm translating it in English with present tense. For you meet him, and then this phrase, birkoth tov, very, very literally, it is blessings good. So, for you meet him with blessings good. And good has a wide range of meanings. This word tov in Hebrew, it can mean good, it can mean fitting, it can mean useful, it can mean healthy, it can mean beneficial. I mean, it has a range of meanings. So this verb, I think the idea is you bring to meet, or you come to meet with, like you come to present. You bring a person something when you meet them. And in this case, what God is meeting him with is good blessings, or blessings of goodness, if you wanted to take this as like a substantive. This makes me think of the image like when Melchizedek comes out after the battle to meet Abraham and he blesses him. That I don't know if that's in the mind of the psalmist when he was writing this, but that's just the image that pops into my head. And then the next line, and I've put this word in a different color here, so you can, because this word's going to pop up a few times. Tashith. Tashith is literally you set, or you put, or you appoint, or you place. Sheath is just to set something, to put something. And it can sometimes mean to make something into whatever it is. It has a wide range of meanings. And so I'm just going with the most basic root meaning that it has. You set lo rosho, to his head, or for his head, or possibly even on his head, Tiglath-Pilesar. Tiglath is a crown, and then paz is really good gold. Not just gold. Gold is zahav, but paz, refined gold, pure gold, something like that. So here's how the different translations handle that verse. LEB, for you meet him with blessings of good things, you set on his head a crown of fine gold. King James, for thou preventest him with the blessings of goodness. Thou settest a crown of pure gold on his head. Now, this is a great example right here in King James of what my friend Mark Ward calls a false friend. A word that used to mean something in English, but now in English it has a different meaning. And if you read the King James, and you only read the King James, then you can miss what it actually means. And in this case, for thou preventest. To prevent in English now means to stop, to keep something from happening. That's what prevent means. But in the days of the King James Bible, and even into the days of John Wesley, prevent had the meaning of goes before. That's why Wesleyan theology, you'll hear some people talk about prevenient grace. Prevenient grace was Wesley's doctrine that God's grace always precedes or comes before any decision that we make to receive it. And so prevenient grace, preventing grace, is grace that comes before. So this is an example in the King James where if you don't know 400-year-old English, you might very well read a very wrong meaning into this. For thou preventest him with the blessings of goodness. Like, why would God prevent someone from having good blessings if God is giving? So anyway, just a fun little aside for all you King James fans out there. Beware of false friends. If you want to know more on false friends, check out Mark's channel. I'll actually put in the video description below a link to the series that Mark did over on his channel, where he has dozens of false friends all throughout the King James Bible that modern English speakers need to be aware of. So it continues, verse 5 for in English. Chayim sha'al mimecha natata lo. Life he asked from you, you gave to him. Orech yamim olam va'ed. Literally length of days, And then olam is the word. It can mean like forever or to the eternity or to, the age, like the age to come, or it can just mean a long time into the future or a long time into the past. Olam doesn't always mean what we would think philosophically as forever. It just means like way far away. It comes from a root word that means hidden. And the idea, and this is how Walter Kaiser explained it to us in class, the idea was something is so far into the past or so far into the future that it's hidden. And so that's where this word olam kind of came from. But it's not just olam, it's olam va'ed. And va'ed, aid is time. And so I think this expression, olam va'ed, in English, a good way of doing it would be something like forever and ever. And that's how most translations handle it. The Tanakh has just everlasting. It just translates both terms as everlasting. The old Tanakh, the JPS original, had forever and ever, and all the English translations have forever and ever. Now, the question, however, is what do you do with this? Nathatalo. Where does this go? Does this go with this line, or does it go with this line? In other words, this phrase, you gave to him, is this ending this line, which is how the Masoretes have it? That's what this little symbol here, this is called the atnak. And this is how the Masoretes say, here's the middle of the verse. The next line starts after this, or the next half of the verse logically. So the Masoretes broke it here, and they read this all together. And that's why I put it on the same line. Life he asked from you, you gave him. It doesn't say, there's no vav here, like, and you gave him. It's just life he asked from you, and then this, you gave him. So that's why I put the little ... here. But the Masoretes weren't inspired. They sometimes get things wrong. And you could also go with life he asked from you, or he requested life from you. And then this, you gave him, should actually go on this next line, and it would be, you gave him length of days forever and ever. Length of days is just how you would say a prolonged life, a very long life. So it's either saying he asked from you life and you gave it to him, and then the next line clarifies what that means, length of days forever and ever, or he asked of you life and you gave him length of days forever and ever. Like you gave him more than he even could have imagined asking for, rather than you gave him what he asked for. So this is nuance, and it doesn't make a huge interpretive difference. The overall thought is the same, but this is an interesting line, and check the commentaries and see how different translators have handled it. It continues, Gadol kavodo, literally great, Gadol, great or big or large, great, kavodo, his kavod, his glory. So great is his glory, and here's our word again, bishuathecha. This is what we started off with up here in the beginning of the psalm, in your salvation. So it matches, it's a callback to how the psalm began, in your salvation, how he exceedingly exalts. Great is his glory in your salvation. And this is a key theological point. In kings in the ancient world, their glory was their strength. Their glory was their might, how many peoples they had subdued, how many battles they had won, how strong their arm was, how mighty their forces were. That's where ancient Near East kings' glory comes from. And you don't have to wonder about this. You can read it literally carved in stone, because that's what ancient kings did. They made monuments to ascribe glory to themselves. And so in the psalm, you have here Israel's king. His glory comes in God's salvation, not in his own might. And that's what every true king of Israel was supposed to recognize. Moses made this very clear in Deuteronomy, and the kings that came after should have known it. Some of them did, most of them didn't. But great is his glory in your salvation. And then hod v'hadar, splendor and majesty, teshaveh alau, you placed upon him. So because he glories in God's salvation, in God's strength, in God's might, that is why any splendor and glory can be placed upon him by God. It's like he honors God, and only then does God honor him. So it's a very reciprocal relationship between the anointed one, the king, and God. Verse 7, 6 in English, Ki tashithehu, And here's the term. It's in a different color again so you can see. For you set him barachoth la'ad. Here are two terms we've already seen before in the psalm. Birchoth, we saw this up here. Blessings. Here it's the same word. It's enunciated slightly differently, but it's the same word. That's just a pronunciation, like a chanting, singing thing. But it's the same thing. Blessings for time. There's va'ed. This is the same as here. Va'ed and la'ad. Same word. And so that's why I've translated it, for you set him blessings forever. So God has set some things already. He's set a crown of pure gold for his head. And now in this one, he set him blessings forever. Now, Golden Gate, in his commentary, he makes the argument that when you have this verb, sheath, and something that comes after it in the accusative, that it's not talking about setting something, but it's talking about setting the thing as something, like turning something into or making into. And so I think Golden Gate translates this as something like, you made him a blessing forever. And he takes the plural blessings as intensive. And there's some ambiguity in how you can translate. I mean, that Golden Gate has a valid translation, but that's not the only way. Here are the different ways it's been handled. Lexham English, for you set on him blessings forever. NIV, surely you have granted him unending blessings. King James, thou hast made him most blessed forever. So instead of making him into a blessing, it becomes passive, making him one who is blessed. Old JPS usually follows the King James in a lot of ways. The Tanakh, the newer JPS, you have made him blessed forever. The Revised Standard Version Catholic Edition, yea, thou dost make him most blessed forever. New Revised Standard, you bestow on him blessings forever. ESV, you make him most blessed forever. New American Standard 2020, for you make him most blessed forever. Holman Christian and CSB, you give him blessings forever. So there's some question about what the English of verse 6 should be. Did you set on him blessings? Did you make him blessed? Or did you make him be a blessing? Which is what God said Abram's offspring would be all the way back in Genesis 12. You will be a blessing. So I think there's a good case you can make for any of those three translations. Then the next line, Techadehu basimcha eth panecha. You make him joyful. That's what this first verb means. You make him joyful in joy with your face. And sometimes this is translated in the English translations as with your presence or in your presence or something like that. But it's literally with your face. And the face of God is a way of saying the presence of God. So it's not wrong, but I like the imagery of the literal here. That I think it just preserves a cool image. Like, may the Lord make his face to shine upon you, the Aaronic benediction. Nobody can see the face of God and live. And so anytime it talks about God's face and seeing it or being in its presence, that speaks volumes to a concept of intimacy or fellowship, community that you don't normally get. So you set him blessings forever, however you want to translate that. You make him joyful in joy with your face. Now keep this in mind, because this idea of God's face is going to come back later and other faces as well. And why is all this? Verse 8, 7 in English. Ki, because Hamelech boteach ba'Adonai. For the king, and this time it is the king. There's the Hamelech. So not just a king, but the king who God has done all this for. For the king is trusting, boteach, to trust in Yahweh, in Adonai, the Lord. Uvachesed elyon bal yimot. Literally, and in chesed, and I leave chesed transliterated because we've talked about that term many times before in this series. There's no English translation that does it justice. In chesed, and not just any chesed, because humans can show chesed as well, but in this case, the chesed of Elyon. This is one of the titles for God. Sometimes it gets translated as Most High, but here, I forgot to put this in italics. So I'm going to do that right now while we're doing this video. There we go. So in the chesed of Elyon, in the however you want to translate chesed, grace, loving kindness, mercy, steadfast, whatever, of the Most High, Elyon, and I have another typo is here. It should be he. We're just getting this all live while filming. I could try to smooth this out, but no, you're going to see warts and all. In the chesed of Elyon, he does not, that's what Baal means. Baal means not, it's negating. Yemot. And we've seen this verb in Psalms before. Yemot, to shake or to totter or to stumble. And so because of, through, by the chesed of the Most High, the king who is trusting in Yahweh doesn't stumble, doesn't totter, doesn't shake, is not moved, however you want to translate it. The English translations are pretty much divided between either he shall not be moved or he will not be shaken. So this is what God has done in the past. And now the second part of the psalm moves into what God is going to do going forward, why the king has this trust. Timsa yadacha lachol oyavecha. She finds your hand, so your hand finds all your enemies. Yaminacha timsa sonrecha. Your right hand, she finds the ones hating you. Now, we've seen oyev and soneh in the Psalms before. These are standard ways of describing enemies. Oyev literally is enemy, and soneh, one hating. So enemies are those who are hating you, and hate not just in the sense of like, oh, I don't like that guy, but like hating in the sense of we are enemy, like enemies trying to destroy you. And the psalmist is saying God's hand is going to find his enemies. And then the next line of the parallelism, not just either hand, but the right hand. Remember, right hand in the Psalms is a symbol of strength, authority, power, might, judgment, justice. So God's right hand is not something you want to be on the receiving end of. And now we see the flip side of, you make him crowns of pure gold for his head, or you make him great blessings. Now we see the flip side of that in this part of the psalm. Here's the same verb again, tashithemo. You set them, kuthanur esh. K means like, tanur, an oven, esh, of fire. And I can remember this, tanur means oven, because in India, you can eat tandoori chicken, and tandoor is an oven in India that they make it in. So that's just mnemonically. I don't think they're etymologically related, although they could be, but I don't think they are. But tanur and tandoor, it sticks in my head. But an oven of fire, or a blazing oven, you could say. La'eth panecha Adonai. And here's the word again. La'eth, for a time, panecha, of your face, Adonai, Yahweh. So the king seeing God's face, he's made joyful. But the one hating God, seeing God's face, or when at the time of God's face, like when God shows his face to his enemies, it's the exact opposite. They become like an oven of fire. And what does that mean? Well, the rest of the line unpacks it. Ba'athol yabala'im. In his anger, he swallows them. V'toklem esh. And devours them fire. So this oven of fire, that fire is a devouring fire. It's going to devour them. And there's a great note about this in Zondervan's Illustrated Bible Background Commentary, the Old Testament. It says, oven heat being more intense than an ordinary open flame, reducing fuel to hot charcoal, served as a metaphor for destructive power. You see this in Hosea 7:7, where it says, all of them are hot as an oven. They devour their rulers. All their kings fall. None of them calls on me. And Malachi 4:1, surely the day is coming. It will burn like a furnace or an oven. All the arrogant, every evildoer will be stubble. And the day that is coming will set them on fire, says the Lord Almighty. Not a root or branch will be left to them. And then, of course, John the Baptist picks up on that imagery as well of Malachi 4, because he is the Elijah who is to come. So this is a vivid metaphor for God's judgment. But also, outside of the Bible, such punishment was also known to be literal. A Mesopotamian royal letter from about 600 BC instructs a governor to throw corrupt priests into a burning oven. And of course, we see that punishment as well in Daniel chapter 3, the famous story of the fiery furnace. So very vivid imagery of judgment. And it's the exact opposite of what the king experiences, the one trusting in God, the one hating God, the one that's God's enemy, not the king's enemies, but God's enemies. This is their fate. whereas the king, the anointed in the presence and the face of God, is joyous and rejoicing. And the vivid judgment imagery continues, verse 11, 10 in English. Piryamo me'eretz ta'aved. Their fruit from the land you destroy. Now it's an agricultural image. This think of like a lush vineyard being just raised. Vazaram mibnei Adam. And their seed, so agricultural image continued, their fruit and their seed from the sons of Adam, the sons of humanity. Now, some people immediately are like, wait a minute, this sounds like genocide, destroying the seed. I mean, seed, zara, this is a very important word in the Bible, zara. It means offspring, descendants. But sometimes it means seed agriculturally. And there's a lot of overlap between, because that's how metaphors work. But some people said, this is talking about killing their children. That's genocidal. That's awful. How can you. And it's important to note, this is just like a turning them into a fiery oven. That's not literally what God's going to do. Like, there's not going to be a giant oven that he lets down and he throws people in it. This is judgment, metaphorical, poetic language. So it's meant to evoke imagery. And in this case, Rolf Jacobson actually talks about this in his commentary on the Psalms. He says this is stock language from the ancient Near East. For example, the Egyptian pharaoh Merneptah, for instance, boasted in a victory monument, the Merneptah Stela. You can see it and you can Google it. It'll pop up online. He boasts that, quote, Israel is laid waste. His seed no longer exists. But Israel was, of course, not completely eliminated. The metaphor does not literally mean the genocidal annihilation of the enemy's progeny, but is a metaphor that reflects the complete defeat of the enemy's violent scheme and the subjugation of the enemy's military capacity, which is what Merneptah was bragging about. Everybody knew when he left Israel that Israel was still there. They still existed. But he had destroyed their military might. He was bragging that he had, completely defeated them in battle, using this terminology, his seed no longer exists. So this is why studying, people ask me, like on my Baal series videos, they say, why even read these myths from the ancient world? Why even read these pagan writings? Because it gives you background of the world into which Scripture was written. That's why. It helps you better understand Scripture. And it helps you see vivid metaphors when they're used, both in and outside of Scripture. So in this case, these two lines together, verses 9 and 10 in English, these are vivid images, metaphors, poetry, lyrics. Remember, psalms are songs. These are song lyrics describing judgment and the complete destruction of those who are hating and are enemies of God himself. And not just people that don't like God, but look, verse 12, 11 in English. Ki natu alecha ra'ah. We've seen ra'ah many times in the Psalms already. For they stretched out against you evil. Now, stretch out, like you'd stretch out your hand, or you'd send out your hand, or I just left it as literally stretch out. But the idea is they sent against you, or they schemed against you. And the next line will make that clear. Hashavu mazimah. They devised or they schemed a plot. However, bal yukalu. They were not able. So we would say they devised against you an unsuccessful plot. They tried to do evil. They devised it. They schemed it, but it wasn't successful. And then verse 13 in Hebrew, 12 in English, it's hard to translate. So I'm just going to give it to you as literally as possible. Again, you see it uses the same verb sheath, to put or to place. So literally, ki teshithemo, for or because you set them, literally shechem, a shoulder or a back, like your shoulder here. This is a very idiomatic phrase, for you set them shoulder. You set them a shoulder. And then the next line is almost as tricky. B'metharecha, on your bowstrings, tekonen, you establish. So either you could translate this as like by your bowstrings you establish, and bowstrings like what you would shoot arrows from. Or it could be this phrase together means you, we would say you knock your arrow. You ready your bow. You put it on the string and put it would be an elliptical phrase. Like the word arrows is implied. So you made ready on your bowstrings. Like you drew your bows. Al panechem, against their faces. So now a play on the idea of God's face, now against the enemy's faces. So the idea is like you sent them running when their face saw your bowstrings aimed at them. That might be like a colloquial way of saying it. But when we come to difficult passages, let's look and see what different translations say. Like some English, for you will turn them to flight. You will aim arrows on your bowstrings at their faces. NIV, you will make them turn their backs when you aim at them with drawn bow. King James, therefore shalt thou make them turn their back when thou shalt make ready thine arrows upon thy strings against the face of them. JPS, for thou shalt make them turn their back, thou shalt make ready with thy bowstrings against the face of them. The newer JPS, for you make them turn back by your bows aimed at their face. The Septuagint has, for you will set them back with your remnant, you will prepare their face. The Catholic RSV, for you will put them to flight, you will aim at their faces with your bows. The Revised ESV both have the same thing. NASB 2020, for you will make them turn their back, you will aim at their faces with your bowstrings. Holman Christian Standard, instead, you will put them to flight when you aim your bow at their faces. And then the CSB, instead, you will put them to flight when you ready your bowstrings to shoot at them. So CSB removed faces and added shoot. And then the Message, he actually preserves the wordplay of face, but in a different way. It says, you sent them packing. They couldn't face you. So because this is kind of an obscure term, like what does this mean? You set them a shoulder. Most of the translations are taking it as to set a shoulder or to put someone to shoulder. It's an idiomatic way of saying, like we say in English, turn tail. Like you don't really have a tail, but to turn tail and run is an idiom, which means to turn around and show where you would have a tail. Well, I guess in English colloquially, you say tail and you refer to your butt. Maybe that's more of a Southern thing though. Like I'm going to kick your tail. But the idea you give shoulder would be an idiomatic way of saying you turn and run. You turn away. And then lastly, verse 13 in English, the psalm closes similar to how it began. Ruma Adonai ba'uzecha. Be exalted, Yahweh, in your strength. That bookends how the psalm began. Yahweh, in your strength. The king rejoices. So now at the close, Yahweh has shown his strength. So be exalted, be lifted, be magnified, Yahweh, in your strength. Nashira, let us sing. Unzamra, and shir and zamar, these are both words that mean sing. Two different ways. So you could say, let us sing and make music. Let us sing. I just put let us sing and let us sing praise because I always remember in my head, zamar is to sing praise and shir is just like generic for song or sing. So anyway, however, but let us sing and sing. Gebur athecha, your might. And so Gabur is another word for might or strength. Gabur also sometimes has a connotation of might, like warrior might, whereas Az, I think it's a little more generic. It can mean like physical strength rather than necessarily military. But Gabur, at least in my head, at least has a more military connotation, which would fit because this is a song celebrating victory that God has given to the king. Now, one thing that Christian readings of this, as opposed to Jewish readings, bring out is that Psalms often, and we're really going to see this in the next Psalm, Psalm 22, but Psalms often speak better than they realize in the moment. Although, to be fair, some Christian interpreters think that though the psalmists were exactly aware of what they were talking about because the psalm writers were prophets. I think like James Hamilton, I think he takes that route and others as well. I think Walt Kaiser, I can't remember if Dr. Kaiser took that approach as well. But there are some Christians who think, no, the psalmists were speaking and they knew that they were speaking about the future king, like Jesus. But most Christian interpreters I'm aware of say, no, the psalmist had in mind their setting, but they were inspired and they were moved by the Spirit to speak in ways that they themselves didn't even realize would come to pass in a greater way, would recapitulate in the life of the capital M Messiah. And particularly, you see it in in verse 4 here, where David, life he asked from you, you gave to him, length of days forever and ever. Well, the king of Israel, whether it was David or other Davidic kings, this might just be talking about them saying, "Oh, king, may you live forever," as a way of, in the ancient world, saying, give long life to the king, because you want your king to live long. You want his dynasty to continue. So it might, the length of days forever might not be talking about the giving to him, the king himself, because kings would live and die, but rather the house, the dynasty would be the way that the king lives forever and ever. Christian readers, after the Jesus event, of course, go back and read the Psalms, and they start to see things like, Jesus actually conquered death and literally lives forever and ever. Jesus lives to this day. He ascended into heaven and sits at the right hand of God, and he will return. Like he didn't stay dead. Interesting. These are the connections that early Christians made, especially when you have words like your salvation in these Psalms, and that just happens to be Jesus's name. You think about Genesis 12 and the promise to Abraham, and you will be a blessing. Like your seed, the offspring of Abraham, will be a blessing. And then you would go, wait a minute, in Isaiah, the servant was what God was going to make him a covenant to the nation and blessings to the Gentiles. You set him blessing forever. So this is, you can't point to this and go, see, it's talking about Jesus. No, you have to believe the gospel in order to see this. And now this could maybe aid people in coming to faith in Jesus, but that's not going to convince, you're not going to go to a rabbi and go, ooh, see right here, it's Jesus. Cause they'll just be like, get out of here. But for those who know the Psalms and believe the gospel, when we look back at this, we go, you got fingerprints of the Messiah all over the place in the Psalms. So it's something to keep in mind, whether you're convinced or not, that's going to depend on obviously your view of who Jesus is. But that's what the early church did. The early followers of Jesus, all of whom were devout Jews, after coming to grips with what had just happened in their midst and meeting their resurrected king, the Son of David, Jesus, the Messiah, then they scoured scripture and they realized, oh man, how did we miss this? The road to Emmaus was just like a intense Bible study of Jesus being like, yeah, yep, oh, look, there. Like they started connecting the dots. And so that's what I think one of the purposes that I hope to accomplish with this series is to prod people to go, we should be connecting these dots a little more. Whether you're a Christian viewer or whether you're not a Christian viewer, at least you're getting a better understanding of how some of us as Christians approach the text. So that's all for now. Like I said, it's really going to come out in the next Psalm, Psalm 22, which is actually one of my favorite Psalms. So stay tuned for that. And once again, if you appreciate this type of teaching, if you like this playlist, these videos in the Psalm series, they don't get a fraction of the views that my study Bible reviews get or my interviews with different scholars. And so if you like these type of videos, like if you appreciate this teaching in particular and you want to see more of that, let people know about it. Share this video, subscribe, leave a comment, all that kind of stuff to just kind of help these videos rise in the algorithm a little bit. That's a great way to ensure that we continue to be able to do more of these. That'll do it for now. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned next time when we look at Psalm 22. In the meantime, as always, keep training.